Hi everyone, Paul Becker here, Chief Curator of Art Rapture. I have the pleasure of sitting down with Olga Rybalko, a very talented artist based in Vancouver, British Columbia. Here we're able to talk about the show that's coming up that we're collaborating on, called Crimea. The show comes out June 4th and 5th in around Gastown area, Vancouver, 191 Alexander Street. And June 4th is an RSVP opening starting at 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. We do ask that you RSVP and reach out to my associate director, Gabby, which is Gaby at artrapture.com. Should you wish to come on the opening night, RSVPs are mandatory. The next day, June 5th, it's an entire day. We open at 11 a.m. all the way until 9 p.m. on the Saturday, June 5th. No RSVP required, all ages, first come, first serve. We're very excited for this show. And Olga and I are going to hash it up here today, chatting about the show, what it means to us, how it came about, and then dive into some of the specific artworks that you will likely see at the show and going into some of the background and history into each piece that was created for the show. I'm sitting here in my home office in Vancouver. You'll obviously see some great artwork behind me, and I'm very happy to have Olga here with me, who has one of the works, Wild Torita, from the show coming up in Crimea. How we're going to start this off is, Olga, why don't you give a little introduction about yourself, and then I'll kind of dive into how we started on this collaboration for Crimea.
Awesome. Yeah. Hi, Paul. Hi, everyone. I'm Olga Rybalko. I'm a professional artist living in North Vancouver now. I love Vancouver. It's my home. But I was born in the Ukraine. I was born in Crimea, which is why this show is very personal. And yeah, I'm excited to share more about what this show kind of means to me and all the art behind it.
Fantastic. So, interesting sort of how Crimea came about. Obviously, I've worked with a number of different artists, and we've had you in some of our group shows, Olga, but never done a solo show together. And I got to tell you, of all the shows I've done in recent memory, I'm extremely excited about this one. I think the art is deep, there's history, and that's why I really wanted to put this interview together. I think it's important that the audience understand some of the depth, history, emotion, childhood memories that come into this work. And I feel that you've just done an incredible job, not only from a talent perspective to create these works, but also from an emotional journey and thoughtful process to really give some important history and understanding behind the works that are created. Crimea was an interesting a start for us, where my wife and I actually commissioned a piece by you where you leveraged some interesting palettes that are more synonymous with like old Flemish paintings and Dutch masters like Rembrandt and Vermeer and these types of artists. And we were quite blown away at the pivot from the traditional landscape work you've done to then this more classic style of art with hints of Baroque and Renaissance and old Dutch masters and Flemish work. And I think it's really exciting. So we saw that work that you did, and you and I sort of bounced our ideas around to come up with this show where we wanted to have you sort of draw and reach back from your roots of your time in Crimea as a kid and sort of the tradition around Ukraine and Russia, as well as some of the historical, movements or culture associated with that specific region of the world. And here we are with these amazing pieces. Can you give me a bit of background on yourself in terms of not necessarily the art, but your own personal background in terms of where you're from, where you were born, when you came to Canada, these types of things?
Sure, yeah. So I was born in Crimea, and Crimea is kind of a very interesting place. It was part of Ukraine, but everyone in Crimea speaks Russian, and Ukrainian is kind of the second language that we studied in school, but it wasn't my first language. Just because of the history of that region, there's been a lot of back and forth. It used to belong to Russia, then Ukraine, now it's Russia again. And there's never been a very distinct sense, whether it's Ukrainian or Russian. It's very much just fluid, and everyone speaks either Russian or Ukrainian. So when I grew up, I felt more Crimean than anything else. And it's also a very beautiful place. It's got a very Mediterranean vibe. There's Greek ruins, there's like old Genoese ruins in Crimea as well. It's got beautiful mountains, beaches. It's kind of seen as the Riviera for all of like the former Soviet Union countries, so they would all go on vacation in Crimea. So it was really an awesome place to grow up. We'd go to the beach every day in the summer, lived like a 15-minute walk from the beach, and just spent most of our days there. And then in 2003, when I was 13, we immigrated to Vancouver, to Canada. And that was obviously a big change because I didn't really speak English all that well. We studied it in school, and just over the first few years had to go through all the adjustments of learning the language, learning the culture, kind of figuring out what some of the social differences are between Canada and Ukraine. And and did most of my growing up in Vancouver. Obviously loved the city. Even though it's a bit gray and rainy right now. But it's good weather to get some painting done inside.
To Okanagan for a nice rain.
Look, I'll take a little pause there. So I find this interesting being from the outside looking into Crimea, and a lot of us in the Western world really only know Crimea when we hear that word and that area of the world as just a contested area where wars are fought over, and Russia trying to take control and other Western nations trying to support Ukraine in terms of who owns that area of land. And I want to thank you because as you've sort of shared the background of yourself and growing up in Crimea, I knew you were Ukraine, but I didn't know that you were from Crimea. It forced me to do my own research and really start to understand that region. And it actually made me reflect on a book I read recently called The Great Game, which, is all about sort of Russians' potential desire to control India, which was at the time being run by the British Empire. And the region of Crimea and that whole area, the Cossacks and the Khans and these areas within that region spreading from the Ottoman Empire, were highly contested and discussed in depth during that book. And so now, as I've researched into Crimea, it's interesting to not only see the political and sort of war type background, but also actually seeing this is like a beautiful area that vacationers would want to go to. And I don't think a lot of us as sort of being, when I say us, like Western world people, we're kind of ignorant in the way that sometimes we don't make an effort to truly understand a region beyond the surface of what the news tells us. And it was a real pleasure for me to dive into Crimea a little bit more and understand a bit more about the beauty, and then talking with you about, these childhood memories of yours that aren't negative. Like they're really positive, and you enjoyed your childhood. So, I'm quite excited as we sort of tie into the show and maybe start talking about some of the pieces. I'll kind of give a curator's perspective here. So I've had the luxury of touring Olga's work in her studio. And at some points in that tour, I actually got goosebumps as Olga was discussing the work. This is a great moment of pride for me in terms of having the opportunity and the pleasure to work so closely with an artist as talented as yourself, to see a body of work that bubbles up from something that is so personal to you. And when I think of art and then great art communicates. Now, when we look at certain styles of art, like pop art, it really is meant to be just the surface, and that it is what you see. You see what you get. Whereas this work is deep. There's conversation in there. So not only, if you didn't know the background, which you're going to learn some today, it doesn't matter, because the art can communicate to you, and you can grasp different stories or your own dialogue within these pieces as you explore the intricacies of the subject matter that's being portrayed. But when I hear your stories of each of these works, there's a lot of individuality in here. And there's also a lot of thought that has gone into this. I feel like you've really made a valiant effort to dig deep into your roots and understand what Crimea means to you, what your childhood means to you, and as you explore your ancestral roots in that region, what all sort of that political conflict and cultural influences into that region means to you and then your artwork. And I thank you, because you're taking your soul and pouring it out for us to see, feel, and understand. And that puts you in a very vulnerable position, just like any artist is, whether you're into literature, theater, fine art, music. You know, great art and deep work is always something that comes from the soul of the artist, makes them vulnerable, and they put it out for other people to have conversations with. And so here today in this this interview or podcast, you could call it, we're going to explore a little bit of those deep areas and thoughts that go through your head as you create these works. I want to start, you might not have it on you handy right now, but if you don't mind grabbing it, that little book you showed me with the tales and fables, do you have that handy?
I have it, yes.
I think, a good start would be for you to kind of explain what this book is, who read it, and how you sort of drew some inspiration from this actual book of fables and folklore.
So this book is it's called Legends of Crimea. It's in Russian. Funny tidbit, it was 45 cents at the time is what it cost when it was published. And it's really old. I actually didn't even know I still had it, but going through this process for the show, I was looking back and I came across this book and realized that this is the book that has all the legends of Crimea from the area. And this is a book that my mom used to read to me. And I remember all of these legends, and I was rereading it as I was going through the process of preparing for this show, and just realizing all the things that I do remember. Some of them I remember differently, and there are also different versions of these legends and stories about Crimea. And it's helped me a lot too, looking into the history of the region. It kind of has...
Can you show the book up to the camera a little bit, maybe flip through some of the pages?
Yeah.
Just so people can get a sort of look and feel like, this is exciting for me. Like, look at the age of this book.
It's pretty fragile, but it has these great little illustrations and all of these stories and legends are only a few pages long.
Yeah.
And it does kind of start from the Greco-Roman times, then goes through kind of the Ottoman Empire, and it ends up at the end more towards the modern times. And I think this book was published when it was still the Soviet Union, but so it kind of ends up with the more recent histories. And you can even see, I think that was me drawing on it.
I love this. So this gives some great context into the show, and we'll have that on display during Crimea. It won't be available for people to pick up and touch, but perhaps Olga can flip through some of the pages if you happen to be there when it's a quieter moment. So I think let's dive into some of the work. We'll start with the constant sentinel.
Yes, and this whole experience has been quite unusual for me because I'm not normally used to creating work that's so loaded with symbolism and history. I come from a background of landscape painting, which I love, and I love telling stories through landscape as well, but this has been, it's been very different and challenging, but at the same time so rewarding, when you finally come to the point where you have this concept or idea or an inkling of an idea, but then putting it into visual terms and completing in painting is really special.
Yeah, well, it is special. And, as people watch this on their computer screens or on their smartphones, the digital imagery you see here does not do these paintings justice. You have to see this in person. They're absolutely exquisite. We used this piece, the Constant Sentinel, as the core piece for almost the cover marketing for Crimea. What's quite special about this work is it's also a self-portrait of Olga Rybalko. So, Olga, do you want to sort of explain what people are seeing here?
Sure. So this one is probably the more recent history and more autobiographical than the other works in the show. And it just kind of has to do with the line that I've been tiptoeing on with my identity between being Ukrainian, Russian, and my Crimean, and also knowing that I'm all of those things. It's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. And then the relationship of Ukraine and Russia, which Russia in this painting is represented by the two-headed eagle, which is a big symbol of it. But I wanted to make it a very powerful painting and give the female character this kind of power attitude stance that not to portray Crimea as kind of a victim, but more of just a place with a rich history that's so complex and it has been contested, but also taking ownership of that identity.
Your use of light and shadow in this work is amazing, also known as chiaroscuro. And one thing that people can't tell from the digital image here is the texture of your brushstrokes and how the light reflects and refracts from the brushstrokes themselves. And where I especially see this is in the cross stitch on that garment that you're wearing. And when I looked at this painting, I could almost feel the cross stitch. And my family's European. My Oma from my Dutch side loved doing cross stitch. My mom, who's from England, did cross stitch growing up as well. So I'm very familiar with the technique and the overall look and feel of cross stitch. But it's amazing how you've been able to really gravitate towards a textural feel in your art, but it's not like the oil paint is sticking out like cross stitch does. It's just an impressive way that you've used the right color and tones to make that cross stitch look and feel like if you were to graze your hand across that oil painting, you would feel the cross stitch. Can you describe to us some of the symbolism in the garment as well as the headdress and the ribbons?
Sure. So the cross-stitch pattern is, the colors black and red are very traditional Ukrainian colors, and it's also a floral motif, which you see a lot in the traditional dress of the region. Although Ukraine is such a large country that there are so many different variations of the patterns and the colors, but the black and red is what you see most often. And I remember doing cross stitch growing up. I loved it. My grandma was a professional seamstress, so she taught me all of these little things, and it's something that's very near and dear to my heart, although I haven't done it for years. But I just wanted to have that very traditional element combined with a more modern outfit that she's wearing, like a blazer, So have that kind of allude to this being a modern point in time. And then the headdress, the sunflowers are very representative of Ukraine, because that's all you see in the Ukraine is fields of sunflowers. And then the ribbons are the blue and yellow, symbolizing the Ukrainian flag.
Wonderful. I think it's a great piece for us to use as a focal point for the message we're sending out to fans through different mediums such as print and social media and so forth. What a wonderful piece, Olga. Let's move on to a different work. So you showed me a process work or a work in progress on this particular painting. And I could tell, even though it was maybe 50% done, that it was going to be exquisite. For me, this painting is a showstopper, regardless of knowing the background and story behind it. When I look at this, I see something deep and emotional. I also see something beautiful, soft and elegant. I see different emotions of like almost a somber effect, but yet there's almost hope in this work as well. The way you've utilized your technique to showcase these flowers is next level. It's absolutely top shelf. And the garments of that beautiful woman resting on the table or floor next to that vase. But Olga, as you described the story to me, this work became so much more significant. Can you please describe the work for everyone?
This work has to do with a large part of history of Crimea as a part of the Ottoman Empire, and then as an independent Crimean Khanate. And that part in history is not so bright for the Slavic people of the region, because Crimea at the time was the center for slave trade across Europe. So the Crimean Khans would raid into what's now Russia and Ukraine, steal women, children, men, and then they would be sold at slave auctions in Crimea and taken then to the Ottoman Empire. And even in this little book, there are so many stories that have to do with that time. So, the beautiful girl stolen, then gets taken to the Sultan's harem, and then other stories of raids, and it's very much a darker time, and it happened during the Middle Ages, which I guess was kind of a darker time for all of Europe, and
yeah.
But anyway, I wanted to portray that history in a way that was not so confrontational and kind of soften it up, which is why I wanted to represent kind of the people of Eastern Europe with these flowers. So you have the sunflowers for Ukraine, chamomile for Russia, lily of the valley, which is the flower for Finland, because these raids went up as far as Finland, and have them all kind of gathered in this bouquet, placed in this vase, which is a traditional shape for the Ottoman Empire, to kind of symbolize this gathering of slaves into this one vessel. And this woman who's kind of lamenting, lying there on her side, under her finger she's got a golden coin,
Right.
And that's a golden coin from the Ottoman Empire, and that's representative of just the economic impact as well of the slave trade, because it was a huge driver for the economy in the Ottoman Empire at the time. So even though it's not a great time in history, it was very much something that defined a lot of what happened after for Europe and Asia.
And it's, thank you for that description. Thank you for creating this work of art. And, where I see sort of the hope in this is, we've come out of that era, and, there is some degree of slave that still exists around the world, but we've come a long way as people to know that it's not acceptable to treat, human beings as possessions. And for me, the flowers, even though they represent the people, they also represent the resilience, the hope, and the beauty within human beings themselves. And you've just displayed this for us and told this story through art in such a special way. Absolutely magnificent work of art, Olga. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And this was one of my favorite ones to paint. It was definitely a challenge because of the amount of detail and the amount of different elements in that painting. But yeah, I loved creating it.
Well, I'd love to see more paintings like that. That's for sure. Okay, let me pull up another painting.
Sunken ships. So this actually, from what I remember, really particularly relates to the specific city that you spent your childhood in. If I pronounce it correctly, I hope Sevastopol.
Yeah, Sevastopol. So I was born in Sevastopol, and it's kind of the largest city on the southern coast of Crimea. It's also a naval base, so there's the fleets, the Russian and Ukrainian fleets were stationed there. And this painting represents this story that's a huge part of the identity for the city. So everyone knows this story. There's a monument that commemorates kind of what happened, and it has to do with the Crimean War, which happened in the 1850s. And there was a point where they took seven ships at the beginning, and then they added more, and they sunk them at the entrance to this bay, which was the main way in for enemy ships. And it was to prevent the enemy ships coming into the city. So it was this huge sacrifice that they made, taking these ships, sinking them to save the city, basically. And it's a story that everyone kind of knows and everyone learns about when they visit the city. So I wanted to pay tribute to kind of the sacrifice that was made, but have the ship or the spirit of the ship being lifted up and out of the water, because no one's really seen them since. The ships were destroyed, and they blew them up to get rid of the blockage for entrance of the ships. I think there were some bits of the ships that were salvaged, but not that much.
I feel like a painting like this immortalizes the sacrifice that the local people made to protect their land and their people. And you've just displayed this in such a majestic way. There's almost hints of surrealism here as well, which I find very thought-evoking. And, you've got this beautiful woman who's a guardian, almost a goddess potentially. And that draws on some of that old, mythical, rich history that is present in Crimea from, the early settlers from the Greco-Roman era in 1000 BC. And it's a great story, and here we have a work of art that's able to communicate that story to people. And for me, again, I had no idea about that piece of history, you've displayed it for us to thoroughly digest. Now, what about the flowers in the water?
So the flowers represent they're chamomile again, and they're representative of the Russian Empire, because it's also during the time when the Russian Empire was quite strong. She's also wearing this sash with the Order of St. Andrew.
Okay.
So that was awarded to the city to kind of commemorate the hero status of the city because of this huge effort and sacrifice that was made. And I thought it was, I think just visually I wanted to have something as well that kind of floating on top of the water. And it could do with, people throwing flowers in the water when any kind of commemorative events are happening.
Right.
So like when there's a new ship being built or anything of that sort. Yeah.
Now, did you learn, you said this story is very prevalent growing up, so were there almost books about this particular sacrifice growing up that like every kid learns about?
There's probably like a whole book just on that one event that happened, but there is actually in my little book of legends, there's a story as well about what happened.
Okay.
And part of that story is also that it wasn't just the ships, but the kind of the souls of the sailors they locked their arms down underwater to prevent the enemy ships from coming in.
Very cool.
Yeah, and so this monument to the sunken ships, it's pretty much the symbol for the city. It's on the coat of arms of the city. It's on one of the notes, like one of the banknotes.
Okay.
And it's smack in the middle of like the touristy part. So this painting it's probably the earliest kind of historical stage of this whole story of Crimea. The history of Crimea goes back to like the 6th century BC with this Greek settlements at Chersonesus. And there are stories from that time of Crimea actually being this wild place that's uninhabitable, or the native tribes that lived there were savage, they did human sacrifices. So the way that the Greeks and Romans saw the place were, it was more like them civilizing this area. They brought agriculture to Crimea, they brought winemaking, which I guess they brought everywhere they went. And this story has to do with this woman, Iphigenia, and it ties into the story of Troy. So she was supposed to be sacrificed for King Agamemnon so that he could have wind in his sails to then sail on to Troy, because they were locked with no wind and they couldn't move. And she ends up getting saved by goddess Artemis, who's represented by this statue in the painting, and replaced by a deer on the sacrificial altar. And then Iphigenia is taken by the goddess Artemis to Crimea to then be a priestess in her temple. And then her role becomes to do the sacrifices to Artemis. So it's kind of a full circle thing where she was supposed to be the object of sacrifice, then becomes the tool of sacrifice.
Wow.
And there are several versions of this myth as well, if you look into the history. But eventually she ends up meeting her estranged brother because he gets waylaid on the shores of Crimea,
Right.
and then she ends up saving him, and they go back to Greece.
Yeah. This painting is an absolute showstopper. And your brushstroke technique when working on feathers and fur is very exquisite. People, when you come in person, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. Olga has an ability that really embraces texture with her brushstrokes, and you can sense the feeling as if your fingers were petting the animal. Let's move on. I mean, this is just a great still life. It's not a huge painting. I believe it's 18 by 24, if I'm not mistaken. I love lemons. I love still lifes. This is a really, I don't know. This work makes me smile. There's something about it that seems very uplifting because of the use of light in here and what's associated with, drinking tea, which is almost a family, camaraderie, relaxation, contemplation, these types of things. And that's how I feel when I look at this painting.
And I wanted to, this is a small piece. I wanted to have something that was a bit more lighthearted and fun, because the other works are so loaded with meaning and symbolism. And this kind of goes with the whole storytelling aspect, because I used to we would make tea, read books, or tell stories. It's very much something to sit down around and communicate, and so it brings in the storytelling aspect. And I love painting lemons as well. So that was a fun one to create for me.
Very nice. And let's do the last painting here that is one of the most thoughtful works in the show. So let me just pull this up here. Collectivist knowledge. Okay. That's showing for everyone now.
Yeah, so this piece has to do with probably one of the biggest eye-opening experiences that I've had because of being an immigrant. Because growing up in Ukraine, you learn all of this history and all of these great things, and you think your country's the best, and the way we do things and the way we think about things is the right way. But then having immigrated to Canada and kind of starting to learn more of the Western culture, and there's definitely more of the individualism focus in Western culture rather than the collectivism, which is very much present in the former Soviet countries. Right. So with all the history of communism and the greater good, and we all work for the benefit of everyone. So this painting kind of represents the history, and the ideas that you grow up with don't necessarily have to stay with you, or it's not the only one true thing that is out there. There are many ways of looking at the world. There are many different philosophies, and they can all be right, that you can take something from all of them. And in this painting, she's kind of sitting there having this book tied to her face. And the book is actually the kind of first grade alphabet kind of book that you learn from, that everyone learns from as a kid. And I had it in grade 1 as well. And the funny thing about it too is it's still loaded with a bit of Soviet propaganda, and there's Lenin in it and all those things. It's subtle, but it's present. And then she's contemplating whether she's gonna cut the ties and maybe turn to all of these other books that are sitting there. And I don't know if people can see it on the screen, but the titles are so that's the Teachings of Buddha, the Journals of Maslow, Analytics of Confucius. Sorry, I'm looking at it because I have the painting beside me that I can actually read it.
Definitely people can't see the titles.
Yeah, there's the Communist Manifesto, Plato's Republic, René Descartes, and Al-Kindi. So I wanted to kind of gather the major philosophical works from most of the different cultures that I could think of, and have them all represented in that painting as kind of options for...
And I feel like the oil lamp, which is also very traditional, also just represents, light and knowledge. And so regardless of your belief system, there is always truth somewhere else, or someone else's version of truth. And if we open our mind to embracing other thoughts, other people's cultures, we will find more light. And I love this painting. Also, the wallpaper in the background, astonishing. Very well done, Olga. I think we're going to wrap up this interview. I do want to thank you very much, not only for joining me in this video podcast interview as we prepare for the actual Crimea show, which is happening again June 4th and 5th in Vancouver, British Columbia at 191 Alexander Street. But thank you for digging deep into yourself, into your roots, into your soul, into your ancestral history, and sharing that with us. Not only from a visual standpoint, but from an audible standpoint today in this interview. I want to sort of do a quick, roundup for everyone to know about the show. So again, June 4th and 5th. I want to thank our sponsors for the show. So Low Tide Properties for being our presenting sponsor. Also in support of our show is Friend Winery as well as Bomber Brewing. And in addition to that, we're supporting Writers Exchange by donating proceeds from some of the paintings that are sold, which is a great charity based in the downtown east side of Vancouver. So really happy for this show coming up. Art Rapture production, curated by myself. I'm elated. I can't wait. It's our only physical show this year in Vancouver. So come out again if you want to come opening night. RSVP is mandatory. Please email Gabby, Gaby, at artrapture.com if you wish to secure a spot for opening night. And then the Saturday, open all day for anyone to attend. First come, first serve. Any final sort of thoughts, Olga?
Just thank you, Paul. This wouldn't have happened without you. And even trying to condense kind of the history and everything I wanted to say into the few paintings has been tough. So there's obviously stuff that I may have missed, and I'm sure there's going to be more paintings with this theme after the show as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Olga and I have discussed, and commission requests will be available for everyone. If, say, you come in and you see a painting that's sold, and you want something similar, Olga will reach into this Crimean theme for commission requests, and she will create a sketch for you to approve first. So it will be Olga's work, her creativity, her vision, her history for a work, and she'll create a sketch for anyone who wants a commission request beyond the work that's shown here. Also, quick note, all the artwork will be online. It'll be available online at artrapture.com. And we will open up acquisition possibilities at 7 p.m. on June 4th. So the people that come into the venue and viewers online, you're able to collect through either the online platform or come to the show in person. I think it's going to be an incredible show, and the way that Olga's described the work is monumental for me. But at the same time, these works still allow for your own personal and individual interpretation as you come and view these pieces for yourself. Again, the work is exquisite. The talent is there, the history is there, the communication is there, and we are absolutely elated for Crimea, June 4th and 5th here in Vancouver. Thanks, Olga.
Thanks, Paul.